The beaches of France were behind them, but the shadow of defeat crossed the channel with every returning ship. By early June 1940, Britain stood alone. The French front had collapsed, the Low Countries were lost, and the British Expeditionary Force, though miraculously rescued, had left behind its guns, tanks, and vehicles on the sands of Dunkirk. A nation that had escaped annihilation now faced invasion. London was tense but calm. Bomb shelters were being dug in city squares, barrage balloons floated over rooftops, and anti-aircraft guns lined the Thames. The Royal Navy patrolled the Channel like a wall of steel, but everyone knew, if the Germans came, it would not be a war fought abroad. It would be a war fought at home. In Parliament, Churchill spoke not of peace, but of perseverance. Wars are not won by evacuations, he reminded the nation. Yet he also knew Dunkirk had saved the heart of the British Army, and with it, the hope that Britain might still endure. For the first time in centuries, the island prepared to defend its shores. The miracle at Dunkirk had bought time, precious, fleeting time. Factories that once made cars now forged rifles and Spitfire parts. The sound of hammers and engines became the anthem of survival. Across the nation, men joined the Home Guard, shopkeepers, clerks, students, all training with broomsticks and borrowed rifles to repel the invasion everyone expected. The beaches of southern England were fortified with barbed wire, mines, and concrete blocks. Pillboxes rose in the countryside, like scars of defiance. In the fields, decoy fires were built to confuse German bombers. Churchill ordered, "We shall fight on the beaches," and the people believed him. Behind the stoic calm, fear lingered. Families taped their windows, prepared blackout curtains, and sent children to the countryside in trains filled with tears and uncertainty. But in that fear, something was born, a unity that no army could destroy. Britain was becoming more than a country under siege. It was becoming a fortress of will. In July 1940, the storm came, not by sea, but by air. The Luftwaffe unleashed its fury on British airfields, ports, and radar stations. It was the beginning of the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. Hitler's plan, Operation Sea Lion, depended on destroying the Royal Air Force. Without air superiority, the German invasion fleet would never reach English soil. The RAF faced impossible odds. Young pilots, many barely out of school, scrambled daily in their Hurricanes and Spitfires to meet swarms of enemy bombers. They fought from dawn till dusk, sometimes flying 4 or 5 sorties a day. The sky became a furnace, tracer fire, contrails, and the echo of engines that seemed to fill the heavens. But the radar towers along the coast gave Britain an invisible shield, the world's first early warning network. Ground crews worked through the night to repair damaged aircraft, and mechanics slept beside their planes, waiting for the next alarm. When asked how many pilots Britain had left, Air Chief Marshal Dowding replied quietly, "Enough." They called it the few, and they would decide the fate of Europe. When the Luftwaffe failed to break the RAF, Hitler changed tactics. If the skies could not be conquered, the cities would burn. On September 7th, 1940, the Blitz began. Night after night, the sirens wailed. Waves of German bombers roared over London, Coventry, Liverpool, and Portsmouth. Incendiary bombs turned entire neighborhoods into infernos. The Thames glowed red with fire, and the skyline was silhouetted by smoke. Underground stations became sanctuaries. Families slept on platforms beside strangers, sharing tea, songs, and whispered prayers as the earth shook above them. Churches burned, factories crumbled, and yet the trains still ran. The newspapers were printed. Milkmen delivered bottles through streets of rubble. The spirit of defiance became a daily routine. From the ruins of St. Paul's Cathedral, standing untouched amid the flames, came a symbol that even in destruction, faith endured. Britain had learned to live with the darkness and to fight within it. By the winter of 1940, the Blitz had failed to break Britain. The Luftwaffe had lost thousands of aircraft, and Hitler turned his gaze east toward the Soviet Union. But Britain still bore the scars. Cities shattered, families broken, children orphaned. And yet the nation refused to yield. In the fields, women of the land army harvested crops to feed the population. In factories, workers, many of them women, produced aircraft faster than Germany could destroy them. In every bombed-out street, flags still flew from shattered windows. The Dunkirk Spirit, the unity born from disaster, had become the heartbeat of the nation. Churchill knew that survival was only the beginning. If the British Empire lasts 1,000 years, he said, men will still say, this was their finest hour. Britain had stood alone, but not defeated, and from that lonely defiance would rise the resolve to take back the world. Winter 1940. Britain stood isolated, no allies, no armies on the continent, no certainty that the next sunrise would not bring invasion. France had fallen. Norway and Denmark were gone. Even America remained neutral. The map of Europe was a sea of black crosses. And in the middle of that darkness, one island. Churchill called it the hardest winter of our history. U-boats prowled the Atlantic, cutting supply lines and sinking convoys faster than they could be replaced. Food and fuel grew scarce. Ration books became the currency of endurance. Families learned to cook with scraps, to live by candlelight, to measure sugar like treasure. And yet, through the cold and fear, there was resolve. The radio crackled each night with the same voice, firm, defiant, unbroken. This is London, it said, and we are still here. The message reached every occupied nation in Europe. The world's last free voice had not gone silent. As the men fought in the skies and seas, a different army rose at home. They wore no medals, but carried the weight of survival on their shoulders. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force tracked enemy bombers from radar screens. The land girls plowed the fields once tilled by absent fathers and brothers. In shadowed factories, women welded aircraft frames, packed munitions, and repaired engines that would defend the island. They were the quiet backbone of Britain's survival, the soldiers behind the soldiers. In London, women served as ambulance drivers, nurses, and air raid wardens. When bombs fell, they ran toward the fire. When homes collapsed, they pulled strangers from the rubble. A journalist wrote, "In this war, courage has no gender." The strength of Britain was no longer in its empire or its armies. It was in its people, and they were unbreakable. Through the nights of the Blitz, hope traveled on airwaves. BBC broadcasts, often recorded in the depths of underground studios, carried not just news, but morale. Churchill's speeches, read across crackling radios, turned fear into fire. "Let us brace ourselves to our duties," he said, "so that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour." Across the Channel in occupied France, resistance fighters tuned in secretly, risking death to hear those words. In Norway, Poland, Holland, and Greece, that same voice became a beacon. The world was listening to the heartbeat of defiance, Even music became resistance. Vera Lynn's "We'll Meet Again" played over the wireless, and soldiers at the front sang softly to the rhythm of home. It wasn't just a song, it was a promise that someday the darkness would lift. While the bombs fell over London, a silent war unfolded in the shadows. Britain's intelligence services, MI5, MI6, and the newly formed Special Operations Executive became weapons of secrecy. Their mission: sabotage, espionage, resistance. Codebreakers at Bletchley Park worked day and night to decipher the unbreakable enigma. Their success would shorten the war by years. Agents parachuted into occupied Europe with false identities and cyanide pills sewn into their collars. Saboteurs blew up railways, stole German plans, and guided resistance movements in France and Norway. For every soldier fighting in daylight, there was another risking everything in silence. The world saw Britain standing still, but beneath the surface it was striking back. Every decoded message, every clandestine act, was another spark in the darkness. The island under siege had become the nerve center of defiance. By the spring of 1941, the impossible had been achieved. Britain had survived. The Blitz was ending. The invasion that Hitler promised had never come. And across the Atlantic, something stirred. The United States began sending weapons, planes, and supplies under the Lend-Lease Act. The lonely island now had a lifeline. In secret meetings, Churchill and President Roosevelt forged a bond that would change the world. They drafted the Atlantic Charter, the blueprint for freedom that would one day define the post-war world. Two nations, divided by ocean but united by belief, began to prepare for the counterattack. The storm of 1940 had not destroyed Britain. It had tempered it, forged courage in fire, unity in ruins, and faith in the face of despair. The Dunkirk Spirit had become something greater. It was now the spirit of an entire world ready to fight back. While bombs fell over London, another war raged unseen, the Battle of the Atlantic. It was a struggle not for land, but for survival. Every loaf of bread, every bullet, every drop of fuel Britain used came by sea. And the sea had become a battlefield. German U-boats hunted in wolf packs, torpedoing convoys under cover of darkness. Merchant ships burned across the horizon, their cargoes sinking into the black Atlantic. The Royal Navy fought to keep the arteries of the Empire open, while air patrols from Coastal Command hunted the hunters. New technologies turned the tide: sonar, radar, and the breaking of German naval codes. Slowly, painfully, the losses began to even out. But every victory came at a terrible cost. Sailors lost to the deep, convoys vanishing without a trace. As Churchill said, the Battle of the Atlantic was the dominating factor of the war. Everything else depended on its outcome. In the streets of Britain, the war became a way of life. Posters read, "Careless talk costs lives," urging silence and vigilance. Blackout curtains turned cities into shadows. Children practiced air raid drills at school. Every wail of the siren could be the last sound they heard. But the home front did more than endure. It innovated. The Ministry of Food taught families to dig for victory. Vegetable gardens replaced lawns, and pigs were raised in city courtyards. Cafes offered mock fish, made dure from potatoes and oatmeal. Rationing became a badge of pride. Even laughter was resistance. Comedians joked about Hitler on the wireless. Street musicians played through bombed-out squares. It was not denial. It was defiance. The people of Britain had discovered something no bomb could destroy: morale. Britain did not stand entirely alone. From across the world, voices answered the call. Men from Canada, Australia, India, South Africa, and New Zealand joined the fight. Convoys from the Caribbean brought food and oil. Pilots from Poland and Czechoslovakia filled the skies over England. They came not for conquest, but for principle, for the idea that freedom was worth the fight. Polish squadrons, flying Spitfires marked with red and white insignia, became legends of the Battle of Britain. Indian regiments guarded bases from Egypt to Burma. The empire that Hitler mocked as decadent had become a coalition of courage. On the airwaves, Churchill's message reached every corner of the Commonwealth. The flame of freedom shall not be extinguished. And from that flame, the world began to burn bright again. By 1941, survival was no longer enough. Britain began to fight back. The Royal Air Force launched night raids over Germany, the first steps toward reclaiming Europe. Commandos struck along occupied coastlines, from Norway to France, proving that Hitler's fortress was not invincible. In North Africa, the British Eighth Army faced Rommel's Afrika Korps in a brutal desert war that would shape the next phase of the conflict. The island that had once stood alone was becoming the spearhead of resistance. Factories that had survived the Blitz now roared with renewed purpose. New aircraft, new ships, new resolve. Britain was turning endurance into offense. Churchill summed it up simply: "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." When victory finally came in 1945, it was not won in a single battle. It had been earned day by day, night by night, through 5 years of courage and loss. And at its heart was the spirit born in 1940, the Dunkirk Spirit. It was more than a phrase. It was a truth forged in fire, that ordinary people, united in purpose, can withstand anything. From the beaches of Dunkirk to the ruins of London, from the skies of Britain to the depths of the Atlantic, that spirit endured. In the decades that followed, the phrase became a symbol, invoked whenever Britain faced crisis, challenge, or doubt. The world remembered not just what Britain fought for, but how it refused to fall. The Dunkirk Spirit was, and remains, proof that courage can outlast fear, and unity can outshine darkness. When the tide returns each evening to the beaches of Dunkirk, it still whispers the same story. They never surrendered.